Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Nandana Nandana Braja Jana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Nandana Braja Yamuna Tira Yamuna Tira Gopi Janna Vallabha Girivarata Janna Vallabha Girivarata Gopi Janna Vallabha Girivarata Yashodanan Sattva Yashodanandana Prajajanara Yashodanandana Prajajanara Yamunatira Manata Yamunatira Achari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Privija Acarya Astotra Sattva Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Privija Acarya Stotra Sattva Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. ISKCON BBD Founder Acharya His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudeva Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyama Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Yamuna Mai Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulasi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Thank you. And we're doing 19 today. 19? Yes, 2-1-19. Or two, 1 or 2. What are we on now?
It was 2.
Yeah, 2.
Wait, is it 19 or 13? Okay,
Okay.
whatever you prepared for.
Okay. Yeah, I prepared for 19. Yes. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, The Lord in the Heart, Text 19. Itam munis tu paramedvyavastito. Vijnanajik virya surandita shaya. Swaparshnina pidya gudam tato nilam. Staneshu satsu namaye jitaklama. Itam munis tu paramedvyavastito. Parametyavastito Vijnana Drigvirya Surandita Shaya. Swaparshnina Pidya Gudam Tato Nilam. Staneshu Satsuna Maye Jita Klama. Itam munis tu paramedvyavastito. Vijnana Drikvirya Surandita Shaya. Swaparshnina Pidya Gudam Tato Nilam. Staneshu Satsuna Maye Jita Klama. Everyone chant. Itam munis tu paramedvyavastito. Vijnana Drikvirya Surandita Shaya. Swaparshnina Pidya Gudam Tato Nilam. Staneshu Satsuna Mayejita Klama. Itam munis tu paramedvyavastito. Vijnana Drikvirya Surandita Shaya. Swaparshnina Pidya Gudam Tato Nilam. Staneshu Satsuna Mayejita Klama. Ekam munis tu paramed vyavastito. Vijnana Jikvirya Sarandita Shaya Swapashni Napidya Gudam Tato Nilam Satsuna Mayejita Klama. Word for word translation. Itam, thus by Brahman realization. Muni, the philosopher. Tu, but. Uparamet, should retire. Vyavastita, well situated. Vijnanadrik, by scientific knowledge. Virya, strength. Surandita, well regulated. Ashaya, aim of life. Swaparshnina, with the heel of one's foot. Apidya, by blocking. Gudam, the air hole. Tata, thereafter. Anilam, life air. Staneshu, in the places. Satsu, six primary. Unamayet, must be lifted. Jita klama, by extinguishing material desires. Translation. By the strength of scientific knowledge, one should be well situated in absolute realization and thus be able to extinguish all material desires. One should then give up the material body by blocking the air hole through which stool is evacuated with the heel of one's foot and by lifting the life air from one place to another in the six primary places. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. There are many Duratmas who claim to have realized themselves as Brahman and yet are unable to conquer material desires. In the Bhagavad Gita, 1854, it is clearly explained that an absolutely self-realized soul becomes completely aloof from all material desires. Material desires are based on the false ego of the living being and are exhibited by his childish and useless activities to conquer the laws of material nature and by his desire to lord it over the resources of the five elements. With such a mentality, one is led to believe in the strength of material science with its discovery of atomic energy and space travel by mechanical vehicles, and by such tiny advancements in material science, the false egoist tries to challenge even the strength of the Supreme Lord, who can finish all man's tiny endeavors in less than a second. The well-situated self, or Brahman-realized soul, perfectly understands that the Supreme Brahman, or the personality of Godhead, is the all-powerful Vasudeva, and that he, the self-realized living being, is a part and parcel of the Supreme Whole. As such, his constitutional position is to cooperate with him in all respects in the transcendental relation of the served and the servitor. Such a self-realized soul ceases to exhibit his useless activities of attempting to lord it over material nature. Being scientifically well-informed, he fully engages himself in faithful devotion to the Lord. The expert yogi who has thoroughly practiced the control of the life air by the prescribed method of the yoga system is advised to quit the body as follows. He should plug up the evacuating hole with the heel of the foot and then progressively move the life air on and on to six places: the navel, the abdomen, heart, chest, palate, eyebrows, and cerebral pit. controlling the life air by the prescribed yogic process is mechanical, and the practice is more or less a physical endeavor for spiritual perfection. In olden days, such practice was very common for the transcendentalist, for the mode of life and character in those days were favorable. But in modern days, when the influence of Kali age is so disturbing, practically everyone is untrained in this art of bodily exercise. Concentration of the mind is more easily attained in these days by the chanting of the holy name of the Lord. The results are more effective than those derived from the inner exercise of the life air. Itam munis tu paramed vyavastito Vijnanajik virya surandita shaya Swaparshnina pidya gudantato nilam Staneshu satsunamayajita klama. By the strength of scientific knowledge, one should be well situated in absolute realization and thus be able to extinguish all material desires. One should then give up the material body by blocking the air hole through which stool is evacuated with the heel of one's foot and by lifting the life air from one place to another in the 6 primary places. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shanyavadi Paschata Deshatarine. Continuing Srila Shukadev's explanation in answer to the questions of Parikshit Maharaj, he's still sort of dipping in and out of this yogic paradigm, talking about different yogic processes and meditation processes and universal form meditation and things like that in his explanation, ultimately, of devotional service, the practice of devotional service and the goal of devotional service. And here is a very interesting Vedic process being described here today. That Guda means the anus. Prabhupada is speaking more delicately, the air hole, the hole for evacuations. But Shukadeva is advocating this seating posture where you press your heel against that hole and sit like that. Who has dabbled in Hatha Yoga? Raise your hands if you have. Do you know the name of that posture where the heel is pressed against the anus and the other?
That was the practice.
Right.
That the organization that I was involved with. Yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah, that's a very common posture. This is known as Siddhasana. And Siddha, of course, means perfection. So the seat for perfection. Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras actually doesn't give any asanas. He just says you should sit firmly and comfortably. That's all he says. But later, subsequent yogic literature developed all the asanas. And the Siddhasana is a very famous one. And some of the commentators and followers of the Patanjali system say that it even surpasses Padmasana, the lotus posture, which is probably the most famous of all. And this is the rationale here, that it's pressed against the anus, one heel against the anus and one above the genitals, sitting cross-legged like that. And the idea is just like, if you want to think of it very mechanistically, if you have to like pump water up to like you've seen in some places, they used to have water towers. So if you pump it up, but if there's a leak at the bottom of the pipe, you won't be able to get the pressure to bring the water all the way up, right? So you block the leak. So this sitting posture is a mechanistic way of blocking the bottom chakra so that the life air or the kundalini or whatever terminology you want to use, you're able to rise it up. And it's described here through the 6 different positions, the different chakras that I don't know the name of. So this is Siddhasana, this sitting posture being described the best posture of all for this type of meditation. And Prabhupada, as he explains in the purport again, he's explained so many times that this yogic process is a mechanical process. That you follow this rule and you breathe like this and you sit like this. At least the first half of the Ashtanga Yoga system, very mechanistic and very indirect like this. But this is what he's describing, ultimately coming to the conclusion of devotional service. And we devotees, we don't adhere to this process, but we understand the yogic paradigm and the yogic lingo that we talk about samadhi and we talk about meditation and things like that, which are yogic terms, yogic processes, but we understand them in terms of devotional service. It doesn't mean when we talk about yoga or meditation or samadhi that we're becoming yogis, that we're following the yoga system, but we understand, but we use them in terms of devotional service. And even like we're hearing now, what does raising to life air means? It's not a mechanical process. It means elevating our consciousness, raising our consciousness, purifying our consciousness, just like in the yogic process. The beginning of it is very mechanical and very indirect. You sit like this, you breathe like this, you behave like this. But then in the second half of the Ashtanga Yoga process becomes more direct and more focused, that you focus the mind, you find some object of meditation upon which to fix it. You become totally engrossed in that object of meditation, and then you attain samadhi, the state of perfection. So this is the actual vital part or useful part of the yogic process. And we understand this, just like Parikshit Maharaj is asking about, that this is an answer to his question, what is the process of dharana? What is the process of it and what is the goal of it? So this is all of these explanations we're hearing from Shukadeva Goswami are in connection with that. And we understand it in terms of devotional service. There's different reasons why he's explaining this. First of all, he's explaining it because the disciple asked. And generally, if it's a sincere question, the spiritual master will answer it and explain it. And also, it's also explained so that those who are stuck in these materialistic processes of doing yoga, of meditating, of doing karma, doing sacrifices, or even those who are gross materialists, seeing the material world as just an object for their exploitation. All of these explanations, like the universal form is there for the materialists to understand the presence of the Lord in this world, and Super Soul and Krishna as the object of meditation is there for the mundane yogic meditators to give them a transcendental focus to bring devotional service into their practice, to elevate them and to purify them, and ultimately bring them to the point of devotional service, which is the actual goal, not these other things. And the other reason is for those of us who are already devotees. When we hear this, when we hear that none of these processes, yoga, karma, jnana, none of them are successful without at least a touch of devotional service added, that helps us appreciate and understand the power of devotional service. And when we understand that everything that can be gained by these other processes is more easily and more purely attained by the process of devotional service, and that indeed all these other processes are automatically contained within the process of devotional service, and we don't have to look outside that process for any of our sadhana or for any of our perfection. So we understand these things. This yoga explanation should be understood like that. So anyway, at this point, Shukadeva Goswami is focusing on this yoga paradigm. Another explanation, this is given by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. We've heard the description of Jnana Mishra Bhakti and Karma Mishra Bhakti and Yoga Mishra Bhakti, meaning devotional service that is not completely pure, but is mixed with other things. Like someone's a devotee, but they're also into doing yoga, or someone's a devotee, but they're also into fruitive activities and enjoying the fruits of them. Or one is a devotee, but he's also a mental speculator or has some impersonalist tendencies. So this is Yoga Mishra, Jnana Mishra, Karma Mishra, Bhakti Mishra mixed with these other things. So Srila Vishwanath talks about the other side of that. He talks about Bhakti Mishra Karma and Bhakti Mishra Yoga, that the yogic systems, the systems of fruitive activities are actually a colossal waste of time and you don't get any benefit from them. But if you mix in a little bhakti with them, then even those processes become activated, become empowered, and you could actually get some benefit from them. So he's talking about Bhakti Mishra Karma, that you're a karmi, but he's advocating, okay, you're a karmi, add a little bhakti to it. You're a materialist, you're after enjoying this material world, but look at this material world. It's actually a representation of the body of the Lord. Or you're a yogi, you want liberation, or you're after mystic cities or whatever egoistic pleasures you're getting out of your yoga practice. But you add some bhakti, and then you can understand, oh, the object of meditation is actually Krishna or super soul, Krishna within the heart. So this is what another reason why these descriptions are there, to help these materialistic persons, different varieties of materialistic persons, that, okay, you're doing what you do, you're not going to give it up, you add Krishna consciousness, you add worship of Vishnu to it. And again, for those of us who are already devotees, this only reinforces to us how powerful and how important the process of devotional service is, so that we can take it up unmixed. And this is described in many places. We've been hearing about it in the past couple of chapters. Another place where I found this described in a very interesting parallel way is in the Uddhava Gita of the Srimad Bhagavatam. The Uddhava Gita is actually a really interesting part of the Bhagavatam. And I've read it, but I haven't really, now I feel like I want to really study it because I was thinking about it in preparation for this class. We have the Bhagavad Gita and we have the Uddhava Gita. And these are two great discourses, conversations between the Lord and his devotees, with very important and very beautifully put and vital spiritual instructions. And there are so many Gitas in the Bhagavatam, Gopi Gita and Venu Gita, but these have a different purpose. These are expressions of, very intense and intimate rasa of Krishna with his devotees. But the more didactic Gitas, the Bhagavad Gita and the Uddhava Gita, are the two really prime ones. And they're so parallel in so many ways. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, his very best and very closest friend from Hastinapur, Arjuna. And in Uddhava Gita, Krishna is talking to his very best and very closest friend from Dwaraka, Sri Uddhava. So they're parallel like that. And the importance of this, of Krishna speaking this to his friends, we know in Bhagavad Gita, Bhakto Sime Sakacheti, that because you're my friend and my devotee, I'm explaining this to you. So this friendship, this is like the proper rasa, or the proper relationship for giving and taking instructions. Just like also in is that 7th canto, that Brahmachari Guru Kule Vasandanta Guru Hitam Acharan Dasavo Nicha Guru Sujada Soridam, describing the life of the Brahmachari. The Brahmachari Guru Kule, the Brahmachari in the Gurukul. Brahmachari means the little boy in the school, and Brahmachari also means, Prabhupada said, the etymology is Brahma, charity, iti brahmachari. So brahmachariti, Brahma means spiritual existence. Charity means your activities. Like acharya means one who teaches by their activities, by their example. So charity, brahmachariti iti brahmachari. A brahmachari means one whose all his activities are spiritual. So the brahmachari, whether you take it as the little child or the spiritual aspirant, in the Gurukul, what does he have to do? Vasandanta Guru Hitam, he has to control his senses very severely and be very submissive and live only for the benefit of the spiritual master. Prabhupada, he's called Dasavan, which means servant. Prabhupada actually translates it as slave when he translates this verse in the Bhagavatam. You live like the slave of the Guru. And the final line, Guru Sudrida Sorida. And the relationship between the spiritual master and disciple is one of firm friendship. Sudrida means very firm, fixed, concrete, established. And Sorida means Rida means heart. So it means like the heart is the bosom, like we say bosom buddy in English. So it's very firm and respectful. It's not like casual friendship. It's a very firm friendship. So these two Gitas established this friendship, this respectful friendship as their proper basis for giving instructions. Bhagavad Gita is spoken right before a big fratricidal war where the two families are fighting each other and whole dynasties are destroyed. And Uddhava Gita is spoken right before the same fratricidal fighting of the Yadu dynasty, where the members of the Yadu dynasty fought with each other and eliminated the entire Yadu dynasty. So anyway, there's so many parallels like that. Uddhava Gita is a little more in depth in some ways. It's a little bit longer, about half again as long as the Bhagavad Gita, but many similarities and many individual verses and individual philosophical points that are parallel between the two. But anyway, parallel with what we're discussing today is also there in the Uddhava Gita. In chapter 13 of the 11th canto, Krishna gives a long philosophical explanation to Uddhava. And at the end, he says, he talks about how the four Kumaras asked some questions of Brahma, and Brahma couldn't answer. So Krishna appeared in the Hamsa avatar, which I don't really know anything about what actually that avatar is. But he came and he instructed the four Kumaras. And at the end, Krishna told Uddhava, and that's all I instructed them all about Sankhya. So in the beginning of the next chapter, 14th chapter, Uddhava says, okay, you instructed Sankhya. And then another, you've also explained to me, you talked about yoga and fruitive activities, this thing and bhakti and all these different things. So of all of these different things that you've been, so many methods, which is the best? He says, Dharmameka yasas chanye kamam satyam damam samam anye vedanti swartam va aishwaryam tyagabo janam kechid yagyam tapodanam Pratani niyamam yamam. He's describing all the different things that people are putting forward as the goal. Dharmam, religion, or performing your duty. Kamam, satisfying your senses. Satyam, being truthful. Some people, Brahmanas especially, claim being truthful is the most important thing. Dhammam, controlling your senses. Samam, controlling your mind. Anye Vedanti Swartam Va, and so many other things are being presented as Swartam, Swa Artam, as the goal for a person to attain. Aishwaryam, some people are asked after material opulence. Tyaga Bhojanam, some perform austerities, giving up eating. Yagyam, performing sacrifices. Tapo, performing austerities. Danam, giving charity. Vratam, taking vows. Niyaman, and yaman, accepting positive injunctions, accepting negative injunctions. So
Arjuna is asking, out of all these different things, so many people you've mentioned, Krishna, and so many other sages are putting forward, what is the best thing, the topmost thing, even going back to the beginning of the Bhagavatam, just like the sages asking, what's the best religion, the essence of all religion for all people at all times? And as the Bhagavatam answers that question, Savai Pumsam Paro Dharmo Yato Bhaktir Adhoksaje, that unmotivated, uninterrupted devotional service to Krishna is the answer to that question, what is the best thing? So after Uddhava asks us, Krishna goes into a very, not very lengthy, but dozen verses where he explains devotional service over and above everything else. Devotional service is the goal. I didn't have an 11th canto, so I'll read a couple of these verses here from that 11th canto. Krishna's answer to the question: only by practicing unalloyed devotional service with full faith in me can one obtain me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I am naturally dear to my devotees who take me as the only goal of their loving service. By engaging in such pure devotional service, even the dog eaters can purify themselves from the contamination of their low birth. Neither religious activities endowed with honesty and mercy, nor knowledge obtained with great penance can completely purify one's consciousness if they are bereft of loving service to me. If one's hairs do not stand on end, how can the heart melt? And if the heart does not melt, how can tears of love flow from the eyes? If one does not cry in spiritual happiness, how can one render loving service to the Lord? And without such service, how can the consciousness be purified? So Krishna answers Uddhava like this: devotional service is the best, the topmost, the most wonderful, and the only thing you need to do, the only thing that will purify you. So Uddhava responds with another question, just like Shukadev Goswami also explained about devotional service in the beginning of his conversation with Parikshit and Shukadev. But still, Parikshit Maharaj asked, oh, what about dharana? What about this yogic process of dharana? So in a similar way, after Krishna gives his explanation of pure devotional service, Uddhava says, well, what about a person who desires liberation? So in one sense, he's taking it off the topic of devotional service, but he's just making sure that the topic is covered from every possible angle for those who are to benefit those who are pure devotees or on the path of pure devotional service, as well as helping those who are still materially motivated. So he says, what about those who are still materially motivated, who desire liberation, who are mokshakami? It's that akama, sarva, kamova, mokshakama. So these are different types of persons. The completely free of desires, these are the devotees. The sarva kama, those who are full of all material desires, these are the karmis. And moksha kama, those who desire liberation, these are the jnanis and the yogis. So he says, what about them? And he starts explaining very closely to the way that Shukadev has been explaining the yogic process in these chapters. And here's one verse in particular that very closely parallels what's being spoken about today. This is text 34 of chapter 14 in the 11th canto. Krishna tells Uddhava, beginning from the Muladhara chakra, which is that lowest chakra situated at the Guda, at the anal air hole. Beginning from the Muladhara chakra, one should move the life air continuously upward, like the fibers in the lotus stalk, until one reaches the heart, where the sacred syllable Om is situated like the sound of a bell. One should thus continue raising the sacred syllable upward the distance of 12 angulas. I think an angula is like a finger's width. So 12 angulas is, like that, something like that. The distance of 12 angulas, and there the Omkara should be joined together with the 15 vibrations produced with Anushwara. I don't know anything about these 15 vibrations, Anushwara, but the general idea is that he's describing, again, this process of raising up the life air through the chakras, accompanying it by hearing and chanting and meditating on the sound of Omkara, which we also heard described by Shukadeva a few weeks ago, how the yogi meditates on the sound of Omkar as a representation of the Supreme Lord. So the same thing is being echoed, and the same ideas there, that these other processes are there. They're only valuable if devotional service is added. And for those of us who are already practicing devotional service, it means we don't need to add any of these other things. Prabhupada was on a morning walk once in India, I think on a beach somewhere, I can't remember exactly. And he saw someone practicing yoga standing on their head. And I think some of the devotees were mocking like that. And Prabhupada said, no, this is very good standing on your head. What's his name? I think he recently passed away. The name's escaping me. Does anyone remember his name? Corporal Agarn from F Troop, the old television show. He lived to like 100 years old. And until the day he died, he used to spend like 10 minutes standing on his head every day. And he attributed that's why he lived so long. Larry Storch, that was his name. He used to do that, stand on his head. But anyway, Prabhupada said, no, this is very good thing, standing on your head. But then he paused and he said, but not necessary or not required. So lost my track a little bit there. See, that's what happens. You get thinking about some old mundane thing and you lose your track. But anyway, yes, these things are not required. Devotional service is what is required. And this is a lesson for the mixed persons and the materialistic persons. And we also understand it as we all aspiring pure devotees or practitioners of pure devotional service, not mixed devotional service. So this is the lesson we get there. Prabhupada has talked, we've also heard Prabhupada talk about, going back to the discussion of the Virat Rupa, how he explained that this conception of the Virat Rupa is imaginary. Now, I don't take that to mean that it's imaginary in the sense that it's just, completely made up and has no meaning, has no reality. It's imaginary. To imagine literally etymologically means to create an image. Imagine means to create an image within your mind. So that means this Virat Rupa, it's a type of meditation. You create an image, you create a conception within your mind where you see the Lord in this form as represented within the material world. So in that sense, imaginary. Just like even in deity worship, it's described that there are 7 different forms of deities that are supposed to be worshipped. Stone, metal, earth, paint, jewels. There's one other gross one, sand maybe. And the 7th is within the mind. Wood, yes, that's it, wood, Daru Brahma. Yes, exactly, wood. And then the 7th one is mind. So having a conception of the deity within your mind, this is also deity worship. This is also a form of the Lord, even though in one sense you could say it's imagined, it's an image that you're creating within the mind. But this is also proper deity worship. So the Virat Rupa is like that. And this Kundalini and chakras and stuff, this is also imaginary in that sense. One time way back in 1968, someone asked Srila Prabhupada, did I write this down, the quote? Oh yeah. So a guest said, well, sometimes I feel what they call chakras. Like I feel very light over here, and I feel something swirling over there, and that I think they call the 1,000-petaled lotus. Is this just my imagination, or are these things real? Prabhupada says, yes, it is imagination. If you just open up your skull, you will find no lotus there. So it is your imagination, that's all. These imaginations are prescribed for persons who are too much absorbed in the bodily concept of life. Here is a lotus, here is a Manasarova, here is an ocean of bliss, here is this or that. Oh, you have to find it out just to make him concentrate, just like a naughty boy, to make him stop nonsense, to make him stop doing nonsense. Please sit down here, stop this all. Our proposition is, I am not this body. Even if there is lotus, I don't care for it. So these different subtle things, they have some type of reality. Chakras are a type of subtle reality. Although, like Prabhupada said humorously, if you cut open your head, you won't find a lotus there. But they have some degree of reality. And the Virat Rupa is also real. It's a genuine conception of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So these things have some kind of reality. And the whole point of all of them is to bring people into the fold of devotional service. Because this is the principle. Yena tena prakarena mana Krishna nashevayet sarva vidi nisedasyor etayor eva kinkara. Yena tena prakarena, somehow or other, you bring your mind to Krishna. And sarva vidi nisedasyor, all the different rules and regulations and processes and lotuses and universal forms, all of that is simply for this purpose, to bring one's mind onto Krishna. Yena tena prakarena, somehow or other, mana Krishna nashevayat, you engage your mind in the service of Krishna. So all of this yoga, all of this Virat Rupa, all of these different things are there for that purpose. And I'll say again for third or fourth time, it's for the non-devotees or mixed devotees to encourage them and engage them in devotional service somehow or other. And it's also for those of us who are aspiring on the path of pure devotion to give more and more evidence to explain to us and help us realize how powerful and how wonderful and how amazing is the process of devotional service, that those other processes are not even activated unless there's a little devotional service added. So how powerful is it that we want to take to it directly and purely and unmixed? Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karma dhyanavartam. Thank you very much for your kind attention. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. If there's any questions or comments, we can discuss now. Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you very much for your talk. So can it be said that like my entire life up until the point that I came into Krishna consciousness, it didn't have value until I came into Krishna consciousness? And then all of a sudden, everything in my life leading up to that point suddenly had value?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that if your life was actually devoid of Krishna consciousness, then in that sense, it is valueless, because Abrahma Bhuvana Loka, that even if materially you become advanced or you become degraded, it in the ultimate sense has no meaning. So in one sense, you could say that. But in another sense, in a broader sense, a long-term sense, we can see all of our activities and trials and tribulations and pursuits in the material world as gradually leading us to the point of devotional service. Still have so many things I'm into and interested in. And I could see how some of those things on their own valueless, but how they fed into leading me to the path of devotional service, leading me to ISKCON, leading me to Prabhupada's books. So in that sense, our whole life, from not just this life, but many lives, is part of a long, long journey that is happening by our karma and by the whimsy of the material energy, but also ultimately by Krishna's direction to bring us to that point eventually. So in that sense, it's not completely valueless. It's part of a longer journey. Just like look at someone like Ajamil, who fell down in such a gross way, in a terrible way, and spent many years like that in that way. And that was terrible, but it was part of a journey. Long ago, I had a talk with His Holiness Bhakti True Swami, and he said like that we don't know where someone's at in their long-term journey of devotional service. Someone may appear very fallen, but may be on an upward swing, or someone may conversely even seem very advanced, but be on a downward swing. So, having that broad, accepting understanding and attitude about someone's life, or even our own life, is an important way to look at it. But we also want to remember at the same time that without devotional service, it really is void. It really is useless. So I think both of those, I don't think it's impossible to keep those two different attitudes at the same time and use them to, look at our life and to inspire us in different ways. To inspire us when we're falling away from devotional service, or to comfort us also when things are going badly or difficulty, that, okay, I'm still on the journey, and things don't seem good now, but I'm still on the journey, I'm still on the path. So there's a lot of ways to look at it, but I think we can, learn how to integrate these different views. So that's my answer, yes and no. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, it does. I mean, because I was considered a impersonalist leading up to this, to accepting this path of devotional service. Like I was a Buddhist,
I spent a year in the ashram of Ramana Maharshi before I became a devotee, who was also an impersonalist.
Yeah.
And I, so I feel you. I hear exactly what you're saying, and I think of it like that it was a incorrect philosophy and even offensive in many different ways, but it was part of the path, and it introduced me to, brahmachari life and meditation and Vedic culture, and was part of that.
Yeah, I feel like it really conditioned my mind to a place for me to accept Krishna, because I had met devotees before even becoming Buddhist, and I was not open to the philosophy at all. But then after 8 years of Buddhist practice, and then I came to the temple here, and I burst into tears in my first kirtan. So yeah, like that, I guess that process of Buddhism, it had no value up until it led me to that kirtan.
Yeah, I could see that. Yep. Nice.
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Anything else? Question or comment?
I'm thinking about the yogis and how they, there's the component of that one can achieve self-realization and liberation by practicing yoga, but they could hit a distraction where they become fascinated with the mystic cities, power over the material energy of their own body, and being able to manipulate the material energy. And I find that to be kind of fascinating, how even though one, the spiritual journey, and I guess the same could be said for even bhakti.
Sure.
Begin a practice of bhakti, and then there's these distractions that detour or deviate or stagnate their elevation spiritual path. And sometimes I wonder why, why that is, why that's is that part of Krishna's arrangement of a test in order to test our sincerity?
It's part of Krishna's arrangement, and it's also part of our nonsense. That we're looking, that we're still, to whatever degree we're still like that, we may still be looking for the distractions. Actually, even Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes in Madhurya Kadambini different kinds of anartas, and he describes karmonmukya anartas, unwanted things that arise from fruitive activities, jnanonmukha anartas that arise from impersonalism and speculation and yogic blah, blah, blah. And he even describes bhaktyunmukha anartas arising from devotional service. And it's not that the anartas come directly from devotional service, but when you perform devotional service, you get benefits. You get certain benefits of happiness, of peace, of satisfaction. And maybe that could also manifest as pride, or if you become accepted as an advanced devotee, you may get wealth, you may get followers, you may get tens or hundreds of thousands of peoples bowing down, trying to touch your feet. And this can develop into an arta. So these are anartas that arise somewhat from the performance of devotional service itself, that the benefits come. So it's Krishna's arrangement to test us, and it's also exposing to us that, yeah, I'm still kind of a nonsense in this way or that way. But yeah, that's definitely a real thing. And yeah, it is sort of parallel to the yogis getting distracted by mystic powers. It's conceptually similar. Is that?
I'm sorry, I don't ask you the question. Are these yogic processes, are they eternal? Like, have they always?
No. Where was I reading that specifically? I'm trying to remember where I was reading this in the Bhagavatam not too long ago, that they're not eternal because the goal of yoga is not performing yoga. The goal of yoga is liberation, ideally speaking. So when you reach that perfection, you don't perform yoga anymore. So the process is not eternal because it's to be given up when some other thing is obtained. It's also not eternal because that type of liberation, separate from Krishna consciousness, is also not an eternal position. Bhagavatam describes that if you attain vimukta manina within your, again, another imaginary thing, manina means within the mind. So if within your mind you're thinking you've become liberated, but if you have no regard for Krishna, then patantito najati yusmarangraya, you're going to fall down from that position of imagined liberation because of your disregard of Krishna's lotus feet. So the process is not eternal because it's a process to obtain something different. And the Mayavadis, the Advaita Vedantists in particular, they described this, said, okay, yeah, you have a guru, you study Shastras, you follow Yam and Niyam, but all of this is given up when you realize it's all one. So it's not eternal because the process is given up. And it's also not eternal because it's a false perfection that doesn't endure also. Only in devotional service is the return back to Godhead an eternal situation. But the process you're doing in the spiritual world is the same thing that you're doing in the process of devotional service now. So in that sense, yes, they're all temporary processes, and only devotional service is eternal as a process and as a goal, which is identical to the process. I wish I could remember where I was just recently reading this.
You said like the yogis, for example, the yogis from Islam or meditating. So once they attend the liberation, so they don't no more do the yoga. They attend the liberation. They go to the spiritual world.
I can't make a generalization. It depends on the nature and quality of their meditation and realization. It's at least theoretically possible that a yogi who meditates and does the whole yogic process, the Ashtanga, and is actually meditating on the Lord in the heart and understanding that it's the Supreme Personality of Godhead and worshiping or meditating him in that way, at least theoretically or conceptually, such a person can return back to Godhead. In Kali Yuga, probably not. If they're not taking the devotional service in some explicit way, yes.
Yeah, I think you also said like if there is no part of little bit of service, even the karma yoga cannot attend. So I understand that, but they don't know. They don't know that they are pure, doing on jnana basis. So for them, I'm trying to understand what is the argument.
Yeah, I can't say, I don't know specifically. I could just speak about really general principles that if they're devoid of devotional service, then they cannot return to the spiritual world. And even with devotional service, even if there is a conception of devotional service, that process in Kali Yuga is generally speaking not possible. Even if they're in the Himalayas and very austere and meditating, this is not a process for this age. Prabhupada describes that in today's purport also. That this yogi, or was it today's purport? Or maybe it's not in today's purport. But in modern days, when the influence of Kali age is so disturbing, practically everyone is untrained in this art of bodily exercise. Concentration of the mind is more easily attained in these days by the chanting of the holy name of the Lord. So is it theoretically possible for a yogi to return to the spiritual world? Yes. Is it realistic in Kali Yuga? Almost certainly not. Is there some example somewhere? I don't know. Sorry, I don't have like a more specific answer. I could just really speak about it in general principles. Yes.
Were these yogic processes disseminated by the Vedas?
You mean specifically like Ashtanga yoga and
like these yogic
as
processes?
far as I know, the details of it are not in the original Vedas, but were propounded by different acharyas at different times, like Patanjali. He explained that he actually developed the idea of the 8 limbs and all of that. So I don't know if it's in, but the general principles of it, of meditation, of fixing the mind, I'm not an expert, but this is my understanding that the general principles of the yogic process are there in different parts of the Vedic literatures, including the Srimad Bhagavatam. But the actual formulation of what is considered the yogic process today came from Patanjali, he's considered within the Sad Darshan, so it's one of the 6 like bona fide Vedic philosophies, because ultimately the goal is Vishnu, so it's accepted. But I don't know to what extent all of the 8 principles are in the previous existing Vedas.
So they were created with the goal of attaining Vishnu.
Yes, all of them. Yoga, Sankhya, Vedanta, what are the others? The Kannada's atomic theory and Vaisheshika's theory of karma and fruitive activities. All of these things are considered, what's the word that Prabhupada would use? Astikyam, that they're all considered bona fide Vedic philosophies, even if today they're corrupted and no one's following them properly, but they're considered bona fide Vedic theories or philosophical premises. And then on the other side, there are also philosophies that's Astik and there's Nastik. And Prabhupada would always give the example of Charvak Muni, who is also a philosopher and writer and proponent, who said, the goal of life is to eat nice foods cooked in ghee. So beg, borrow, or steal, get ghee and eat delicious food. That's Gnostic philosophy. And no disrespect to Buddhism, but Buddhism is also considered within the Gnostic philosophy, or the not Vedic philosophy. But the yogic process is within the Vedic paradigm in a broad sense. Yes, Prabhu.
I won't elaborate.
Please do.
But I was involved with all this stuff. You're talking about many years ago, and I met the Prabhupada disciple. And through a lot of debate and argument, eventually I quit Krishna consciousness and abandoned.
Jai.
So it's very important that They have that association. My brother was kind of elementary. I thought he was crazy. He believed in all that stuff. And eventually, I came and I put the Mahamantra. And, you know,
Jai.
many years ago.
Yeah. For what it's worth, and this came up in your discussion also, I hate to use the term, but there's a term we used to use years ago, bogey yogis. The bogey yogis, and even we've seen in ISKCON, the hippies and the speculators, and these are some of our best prospects for preaching sometimes, because they may have more familiarity, or they may have a more open mind, or be more willing to try something new. And we don't neglect people. We don't neglect the straight, upright, good American citizens who have no interest. We don't neglect them either. Every devotional service is available to everyone. But he can testify, I can testify. I was an impersonalist. I went to see a play of Ramayana at the Old New York Temple, and seeing that play changed my mind. Oh, God's a person, like that. So Krishna consciousness is for everyone, and whatever our past is, however useless it is, there's an in, we all have a chink in our armor of materialism, and Krishna can find a way in if the devotees are preaching vigorously, and if we're sincere as recipients, that there's always a chink, a way to get in. Krishna can enter in, Prabhupada would say, in like a needle, out like a plow, right? That, some way to get in. Oh, here's a nice play, Ramayana. And that changed my life. It literally turned my whole worldview upside down, just seeing a play. So anyway, so that's what Shukadeva Goswami is doing. Okay, you're a yogi. Here, this is how you do it with devotional service, in the hopes that it'll enter into those people's hearts, and they'll become a devotee. Like the 4 Kumaras, completely perfected impersonalists, totally liberated. But when they smelled the flowers and the tulsi from the lotus feet of the Lord, wow, their whole mind and their whole conception turned upside down, and they took up devotional service. So in some less dramatic way, that's possible for everyone. And even those of us who are all quote unquote already devotees, that can happen to us in our devotional life, that a moment can happen, or we can get a realization, or someone can preach to us, and wow, I've been missing so much until now, even though we're already so-called practicing devotional service. We can always be open to these, what's the word, satori, right? That's the Buddhist term, satori, when you get some realization that can happen to us. Okay, after 9.
Let me just
Yeah, check online. I'm sorry.
It's so hard that when you're speaking live
Uh,
to remember to
Hare
out of
Krishna.
sight, out of mind. I tend to forget the online audience.
all the devotees, Hare Krishna devotees online. Are
I
there any
have,
questions?
yeah, Hare Krishna Prabhuji. It's very nice class. Just nice to hear from you. And I'm curious that you mentioned Krishna Udva Geet. So I thought the main message is devotional service, or there might be other messages. Could you please tell us in summary about the Krishna Udva Geet?
Uddhava Gita, she's saying in summary.
It's similar to Bhagavad Gita.
I'm not a scholar on Uddhava Gita, but I've just decided that I want to read it and study it. But it's similar to Bhagavad Gita in the sense that, like Bhagavad Gita also describes, in the 6th chapter, it describes yoga. And in the 4th chapter, it's describing karma and yajna and sacrifice. And it also describes so many things, always coming to the conclusion that devotional service is best. So in that sense, Uddhava Gita is doing the same thing, similar thing. But it's a little more involved, a little bit longer. Krishna is telling some stories, he's giving some illustrations, he's recounting past histories, so it's a little more involved. But conceptually, it's very much like Bhagavad Gita. But I'm not well read enough in Uddhava Gita to say more than that sort of general idea.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the information.
Helpful or useful at all?
Yes, yes, yes. It's really helpful. Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Okay, I think we'll end here. Thank you, Acharya Prabhu. If anybody would like to join us today, we have a Rath Yatra cleanup. We're only 2 weeks away from Philadelphia Rath Yatra, 2 weeks from today. So we're doing a cleanup, getting things ready for that event. We're going to start around 10 o'clock. We'll go to about lunchtime. So if you could spend a few hours, it'd be greatly appreciated. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.